Good afternoon, everyone. This is my MA second semester, and we are doing another unit. We've been doing Introduction to Gender Studies. I completed Patriarchy, and today I'm going to take up masculinity. And we know that these are terms that are interrelated. And masculinity is something which I did touch upon when I did Patriarchy. And what is masculinity? If I am to discuss masculinity, I know that I mean, as from a layman's perspective, you look at it as a manhood or manliness. But if you really look at masculinity as a concept that predominates patriarchy, you have to look at masculinity as some kind of behaviors or the role that has been traditionally associated with men and boys. So masculinity is something that we have to look at it as a social construct, just as any gender is. So is masculinity, and all these behaviors that are considered masculine, you know, whether they are biologically influenced, and to what extent masculinity is really biological, and to what extent is it social, is something which is debatable. But if we do presume the gender is a social construct, then we need to really emphasize the fact that the conventions, the traditional role of male, and the attributes that we associate with men is responsible for the masculinity. Not only masculinity, I will also look at toxic masculinity. I think that is a term that we should be discussing today, not just masculinity. Um, Masculinity, manliness, machismo, is also a form of masculinity, which again emphasizes power. It has to do a lot with power and a complete disregard for um, any consequences. So all these is something that we look into masculinity. Also, masculinity, the concept seems to really divide uh, this as to binary opposites of femininity, as a certain kind of a role that a women are supposed to, play in a society vis-a-vis men. So men and women and their roles and what is being associated with these categorizations, something that we have been really taking for granted. So I want to look at toxic masculinity is something which is more important today, because masculinity, it is so prevalent that we today take it for granted, and we're not able to really see through the layers. So today, when we talk about toxic masculinity, we're really talking about cultural pressures. We're talking about men that also have to behave in a certain way. Okay, so it really refers to the notion that the idea of manliness, of course, it perpetuates some sort of domination, and there is also homophobia associated with it, and there has to be a lot of violence and aggression. So the idea that men need to act tough, they have to avoid showing any kind of emotion, and which can be harmful to their mental health, is something which actually has a very serious consequences for society. And today we really refer to is as toxic masculinity. So it really isn't just about behaving like a man. Instead, it involves extreme pressure. Some men may feel to act in a way that is actually harmful, right? So there are many definitions of looking at masculinity. What we can look at is that the idea of toughness. Men should not. Men are not supposed to cry. Boys don't cry. They're supposed to be rough. They're not supposed to be very sentimental. So the notion that men should be physically strong is something that is taken for granted. So men have to be good. They are the protector. They're protecting the women. They have to be physically strong, and emotionally they can be callous, and in their behavior they should be violent. There should be aggression, and all these things. These are the qualities that are actually prized upon men. Okay, so that is why this is the toxicity. Anti-femininity is also one of the aspects. Anti-femininity, femininity is basically the idea that men should reject anything which is feminine. So men should not be like feminine. Like boys cannot wear color pink, or boys cannot cry. It all is feminine. Crying is associated with women who have no emotional control, right? Whereas men are more rational. So all these kind of all those who have joined late, I mean, for me, this is your introduction to gender class, and I'm taking femininity. Sorry, I'm taking masculinity. Another important aspect of masculinity is the power. Now, we cannot take the power away from these dynamics. I don't there is an underlying assumption that men must work towards obtaining power, and it is the power that actually gives men the sense of entitlement, the sense of control, a social status, whether it's financial or any other respect. So they can actually get respect from the others through power, right? So these are certain things that are masculine in nature, right? So what happens in our society is that somehow, because we take it for granted, and we have been taking it for granted, in fact, not just taking it for granted, but we've gone on to another extreme altogether. We glorify masculinity, and I think Bollywood is really a guilty party to the celebration and glorification of toxic masculinity. And I really want to give you examples of there were these movies, like, I don't know if your generation is aware of it, but there have been movies where the hero is after the heroine, and like the Shah Rukh Khan's Dar. There was a movie called Dar. Itself is like that, because this female protagonist is not interested. She was drawn to the love of the mad lover, but this mad lover refuses to take no from her, and he continues to haunt her, and she's petrified and she's scared, but he continues to love her in that way, and he
हेलो
continues
वालेकुम
all here on
वालेकुम
examples from the Bollywood to tell you how we are, in some way, as a society, we all are complicit in this glorification of this toxicity. And how, when we watch these movies, and there was another movie that came up recently, was that Arjun Singh, I think. What was that movie that came? Shahid Kapoor and this girl, Kiara Advani. What was the name of that movie that had come? The songs were very phenomenally hit. I am forgetting the name, but this is again about a man who's in love with this girl, and he's violent, he's aggressive, and he wants to completely control her. And she's like this subdued figure who cannot do anything, of her own will. For little things, she takes permission from the guy, and this lover is full of, and somehow they're separated, and then he goes downwards, he spirals downward in his career, and an absolute drunkard, and he also takes substance abuse. So you see all these things somehow, and but yet he is a character who is somehow glorified. He's the character who's been sketched out so sympathetically that when you watch the movie, you really feel for the guy. So why do we do this? Why are our narratives like this? Because then this, what we see on big screen, it really inspires, it really gets translated into real society. Because what happens with these acid attack victims? Most of these acid attack victims are the girls, they're strong girls who refused, these men following them. They refused them, and as a result, they got punished by acid being thrown all over their faces. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when we glorify this toxic, masculinity, this is what happens in our society. So the women are, it's impossible for men, because they're so used to power and domination and control, that it is unthinkable for them to take no from any girl or from a woman, and it inevitably results in things like acid attack and murders and rape, and so on and so forth. So what we're discussing today is very, very pertinent, and it is something that is, that we really need to, all of us, come together and realize this where is it coming from. This whole entertainment industry, is one such mechanism, I would say, an institution that has really contributed to this toxic masculinity model, which we all need to speak against, actually. So again, this whole idea that the unhealthy habits, of course, are glorified, and for women, it's the whole idea of beauty. How women have to be size zero, how they have to look after their beauty, because that's the only thing that makes them desirable. And so so this is how we, like, men going to the gym, and becoming stronger and pumping up, and women going to the salons and making them prettier. So this is what masculinity and femininity, these are the images that are also floated in the media, the images floated in everywhere all around us, and this is what it creates, concepts of masculinity and femininity. But what I want you to draw your attention is to the fact that it is all a constructed thing. It is not something which is natural. It is something which is being constructed through the various institutions of patriarchy. Right. So I just want to tell you that there was a study in 2011 that found that men who held the strongest beliefs about masculinity were only half as likely as men with more moderate beliefs about masculinity to get, preventative health care. So, seeing a physician for an annual physical, for example, runs contrary to some of the men's belief about toughness. Men are tough, they don't need, any help. So, then there was another 2007 study that I want to tell you, which found out that more the men conformed to the masculine norms, the more likely they were to engage in the risky behaviors, like heavy drinking, tobacco, substance abuse, all that, extreme aggression. And also, in as a society, we also normalize this behavior. We think it is men's right to behave like that. Oh, they are men, so they will behave like this. So we, as a society, normalize this aberrant, this absolutely unacceptable behavior and practices, and hence, we really, somehow, the toxic masculinity pervades and perpetuates. So, for example, toxic masculinity also discourages men from getting mental health treatment. And that goes for women also, but mostly for men. So, depression and anxiety, all these things, mental health problems are seen as a sign of weakness, and men cannot be that. For example, the famous case of, I don't know if we can mention, last year it was in the news everywhere, Sushant Singh Rajput's case, um, who committed suicide. So, a 2015 study found that men who bought into traditional notions of masculinity held more of a negative attitude about seeking mental health services compared to those with more flexible gender attitudes. So, if you believe in those, if you buy those masculine concepts of manliness and are taking any help, then obviously you are not going to treat the mental health problems, and this happened. There is this stigma attached to it, and more so with men than with women, so toxic masculinity also stresses that it is inappropriate for men to talk about their feelings, so, and are not open about their feelings like women are. They avoid conversations about problems, about emotions, which increases their feeling of isolation and loneliness. And which is one of the reasons why men tend to get more aggressive and more violent, because there is this gap of communication. Um, so, so this is something that one needs to look into. So I just told you a bit about like every you really have to look at the model of manhood. Okay. So, what are the core features of this model of manhood? I've already told you aggression. Aggression is something which is very natural, and it is even desirable in men. And men should be aggressive. If men are very patient and quiet, then they are not man enough. So called the concept of real man, is someone who's eager to pick up fight. They have to fight. They have to be instantly. They should be provoked and angered and everything. If he does not, then he is, often say that कि चूड़ी पहन लो तुम, like कैसे मर्द हो चूड़ी पहन लो, all this kind of where do we get this चूड़ी पहन लो, because women wear bangles, so wearing bangle is a sign of weakness because women wear bangles. So we need to really get out of this kind of vocabulary, because this vocabulary itself is so toxic, yeah, and it is definitely this is what is creating toxic masculinity in and around us. So even the slightest intrusion in the physical, mental, or the social space of men is unacceptable. Men must be tough again. It's a very musculated, they have to be very muscular, they have to be very unemotional, and they must not be easily put up. They should be very rational also at the same time. They should not grieve, they cannot cry, all these kind of things. you know uh, is there anyone who wants to contribute to what we're discussing? The idea is that the men should not be vulnerable. The whole concept of all this violent aggression, anger, is to cover up your vulnerabilities, because they have to be strong, and they have to protect, because the whole idea of women who needs protection, and it is the men who give them protection. So they cannot afford to get vulnerable. So also men must be ruthless, they must be ambitious. Once they set a goal, they have to achieve it regardless of consequences. So winning is very important. And men striving to achieve any such goal, the rivals need to be eliminated. So there's extreme competitiveness on this kind of a toxic masculinity model. Um, so we see these, the whole, I mean, this is not something. Also, the fact that once a man speak, it is final, and it has to be obeyed blindly. So men are sovereign, they are free, they're autonomous, they're in control of the world in which they're inhabiting, and the women they rule over. So women obviously are their possession, it's chattels, objects, and also children. So, in short, part of the freedom lies in having dominion over others, and most particularly women. Okay, so men and women do not have an equal relationship, even in the marriage and a family setup. So, and if you just contrast it now, while we're talking about masculinity, let's contrast it with femininity. So all these must be contrasted to the features that are inherent in women. So women are irrational, they do not have any self-control, they can cry easily, they can laugh easily, they're so emotional, they're so empathetic, they lack judgment, they cannot be they're impartial, they're biased, they're physically, they're mentally weak. So these are all weaknesses, all emotions, vulnerabilities. Everything is considered as an inherent, is something like biological nature of women. Okay, are you all listening to me?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
All right. May I ask you, what about the other students, Parvez and the rest? Parvez has not.
Ma'am, we don't know.
मैम परवेज घर जा रहा है.
It's just an online class. You can easily attend. It's not difficult to attend online.
ओके मैम मैं बोलती हूँ अभी.
He can. So what can't he see the timetable, and can't he see the? Why do you have to tell him? उनको क्या दिखता नहीं है, link and everything has been sent. So, anyways, the classes are being recorded. This is the only good thing. So, one, you all can always access it and whatever that has been taught. Anyway, so talking about women and the fact that
मैम
they,
फोन नहीं रख.
koi baat nahi, never mind. So it follows that when men display such traits, they become weak because men cannot be emotional. All right, acting like a woman is a betrayal of manhood. You know, and cold-blooded violence shows the opposite. So that manliness is like fully alive and kicking. So what else do we see is masculinity, how it operates in society. You see that the images of social violence are integral to the culture of masculinity. And especially rape and violence against women जो हम सुनते रहते हैं, चाहे वो फैमिली डोमेस्टिक सेटअप में हो, चाहे वो वर्क कल्चर में हो, चाहे वो आउट इन पब्लिक स्पेसेस में हो, कहाँ कहीं पर भी हो, you see that it is related to the toxic masculinity, the sense of entitlement that the men have, where they take things for granted. Okay, so it's believed that real men are directly responsible for sustaining moral order. So they are the guardians, like they have to restore the order when it is disturbed. So if a girl had violated the honor of the community, she deserves severe punishment, publicly, just directly, Likewise, especially Dalit and minorities, if we look at them, they must also know their designated place in a society. So any attempt for them to become equal, it has to be put down. Okay. To men with such ideas of masculinity, the argument that they must not take law in their own hands fall on deaf ears. So this is the reason why that although we have so many draconian laws against, we have such laws, we have laws for everything against rape, against rape against Dalit, all this, but despite these laws, the crimes are committed with impunity. There is no, there's only increase in the number of crimes. So obviously there is this notion that they can get away with the law, that they can that the law will be found deficient, once the cases are dragged, for years and years, justice denied is justice delayed. So that this is behind all this recklessness is a concept of masculinity. And it is really hard for me to assess the extent to which Indians are outraged by masculine violence. Somehow, we are not able to prevent this violence, and we're not even bothered about it. In fact, we have taken it for granted, and sometimes we even endorse it. The very best in traditional and modern India, we are still somehow we have also kind of lived this binary of male and female, right? And that's where I think we should begin. That's the point, to put our foot down and and hope for a gender neutral society. Because when we talk about masculinity, when we talk about the biggest casualty has always been women, right? It has always been women. So I think it's for the women to now put their foot down. This was just an introductory class to masculinity. There are more aspects to it which I will discuss later on. All right. Any question anyone has? Hmm?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Please be regular in my classes from now on. All right.
Okay, ma'am.
All right. Everyone, take care. I will end this meeting here. All right.
Allah Hafiz, ma'am.
Take care, everyone. Okay?
Thank you, ma'am.